Hi everybody, this video is sponsored by a contribution from Anonymous, and here's her story. I'm writing in today in regards to the topic of gang stalking and communal violence in a religious church-based setting, who in the end proclaimed a patriarchal society, ran by and having several male key figures with high level of NPD. At the time I wasn't educated on narcissism or personality disorders. A couple of them exclaiming on my last night that they themselves were the voice of God. Now I am no way throwing out hate speech or meaning any offense toward religion in and of itself. I am just recounting my own personal private account, which I haven't been able to address or publicly get out since that last night. I am also a narcissism cult ritual abuse survivor. From early childhood, most likely since birth to the age of 15 years old. I have sporadic, patchy memories, but I remember enough. I have lots of unknown triggers from that sort of abuse. That's how I can confirm that religion, cult ritual abuse was going on, mainly with the children in the children's church. It didn't come out to the surface until my last night of attendance, on the night they chose to come out of the closet with everything. They had apparently waited and planned for the night, and I quote, "A very special and powerful man was coming as a guest speaker." I was told so many wondrous things about this person. I had to go see it for myself what all the hype was about. I was a single mother at the time with 2 children. My oldest son was only 7, and my youngest was only 3 years old, who has classic autism and was completely nonverbal at the time. Boy, does that get a target. I had my own place, was financially stable enough, and my children were old enough to where I could start college full-time and cut down to work part-time. So I was a full-time single mom, full-time student, and worked part-time. I had my golden child narc brother living with me at the time. I didn't know about narcissism back then or flying monkeys, and allowed them to guilt trip me into taking my poor older brother in. That doesn't have anything or ever had his own place in his life. Oh, took in our older brother doesn't have anything or ever had his own place in his life, and was given 1,000,001 reasons why I should go and swallow my pride and take him in, and so on. So eventually I caved and took him in. Truth be told, the only reason I did it was because he had been homeless for a long time and was starving. Not to mention my good nature that I worked so hard to acquire and conscious had gotten the best of me, along with the resurfacing memories of when I was 14 years old and knowing what it was like to be in that situation. The first time I ran away from it all, before they found me and forced me back. I only let him in under the strict condition and mutual agreement that it would be only a temporary condition of 2 to 3 months max. Long enough for him to find a job, save up money for a few things and food he would have. Excuse me. Just long enough for him to find the job, save up some money for a few things and food he would have to be out after the 2 to 3 months mark. Pending on behavior, at the moment he started his crap, he would be out. No matter what. That obviously was a huge mistake. I only imagined to get him out legally a year and a half later. The police had to drag him out, kicking and screaming, which turned into him assaulting an officer and breaking into an adult 2-year-old temper tantrum. With him bawling, crying ridiculously loud, crying even louder, literally calling out for his mommy as cops had him up in the air by the arms and legs, carrying him to the police car. When he realized they didn't give a crap about his entitlement, they were really arresting him and taking him to jail. The cops were quite enjoying taunting him, telling him, "Your mommy isn't going to save you," amongst many other things. I was even humiliated for him. Just when I thought I saw it all, it's sad how much my BPD sadistic mom damaged her own son. Of course, mommy did come to the rescue a few days late, just not the way he thought. She showed up on my doorstep out of the blue to spat out her insidious plan personally, face to face. That's the first time I realized she didn't care one bit about her precious baby boy. The woman was completely empty with no heart, not even for him, and she had no qualms about showing it all. She told me what he she told me what he only was to her. Said that he could rot and die in there as far as she was concerned, as long along with some other incredibly cruel and sadistic things that she wished happened to him in jail, while smiling. Told me that if I ever dared to tell him, she would deny everything, and besides, that's what she has me for. Just to wait, just to wait and see what goodies and torture she has lined up for me. The woman actually looked giddy when saying that while standing in my front yard. The neighbor cut her off when she came outside. She heard everything my mother had said and let her know what she had heard, every word. My mother literally squatted and hissed at my neighbor before cursing her out and running off. I stood there with my mouth hanging open with that deep returning sinking feeling I had as a kid. I hadn't seen or heard from my mom in years at that point. My mother had pumped my brother for information over the next several months about me and everyone on the planet that I knew. She bribed him with the conditions of bailing him out of jail for information on me. Every time he would give her what she wanted, and told her that was enough for her to bail him out, and that he would not only give her what she wanted, and more, but he would gladly help in any and all plans she had to destroy me and my children. That he would do anything she said. Just say the word, bail him out, and she wouldn't have to lift a finger. He would do all her dirty work for her. He was desperate at that point, and she knew it. She milked that situation for everything it was worth and left him there to rot, as she told me she would. Moral, don't ever trust a narcissist. After she had everything she needed, she teamed up with all the parties she needed from the information my brother gave her. Grabbed the reins from whoever already had the ball rolling, super ramped up the gangstalking. I know she wasn't lying about my brother. She took great pleasure in harassing me by phone, leaving the recorded conversations of her and my brother while he was in jail on my voicemail. Why would she leave evidence of her? That's stupid. More sadistic and sick than I could have ever imagined. I ended up to where I had to make a choice of not getting my number changed anymore. I was getting it changed every 2 or 3 days minimum. The telephone company, that the only explanation she had was that their system was being hacked, that they were having to go through an ordeal over this legally. The operator had long talks with me, telling me about what was going on from the evidence they had and how dangerous it was and these people were, that I needed to stop worrying and getting my number changed and move out of state. She flipped out when I told her I wasn't financially able and had 2 kids. Anyway, I was told it was a big mess with the law involved. The police were telling me it was down to me making a choice of leaving my number and any open communication there was, saving every voicemail, email, letter, and package or anything that I had gotten from them, not to open it, and to call the police immediately. And if I chose not to do that, they had enough legal charges on them that they would take it upon themselves to force me to do that. They were extremely frantic and serious about this. I didn't know about gangstalking at the time and didn't understand the majority of what they were telling me. What it boiled down to, they thought that myself along with my children were targeted and going to be killed. That's what I'm thinking, because it sounds like your mother is past the point of exposure. It's full on, I'm going down, guns a-blazing. This is a narcissist all in. And this is when they do turn crazy and they start telling themselves, like, it doesn't matter how crazy it sounds, people will go along with it anyway. They were asking loads of questions that I didn't have answers to, even telling me that it may even be by a stranger. They had evidence in everything where death threats, among many other gruesome details, were made. And crazy enough stuff happened, I wasn't going to doubt their word. I did what the police asked down to the letter. It took 2 weeks, and all of a sudden it stopped. From what I was told, several people were arrested. A majority of them I didn't know. Some of them looked familiar. Only photograph I recognized was my mother's. They had her in custody. The state was pressing charges themselves. Good. I was in and out for a while. She was in and out for a while. They would arrest her, someone, I have no idea who, would bail her out. She would do something else, get arrested again until she went into hiding, I was told. My brother was in jail for about a year or so. I forgot what he had gotten the charges reduced down to. Once most of my mother's cronies were arrested and off the street, she forked over the money for a lawyer, got my brother bailed out of jail. I know this because I received a psychotic narc rage hate voicemail, shift blaming me for her being put out and having to get my brother out of jail. He's going to destroy her life now. My brother has zero respect for any female. He treats my mother like a verbally and physically abusing, domineering husband would treat his wife. Well, that's what happened. The son husband turned on her. He enjoys the control. My mother, on the other hand, enjoys the abuse and beatings and gets off on it. Completely sadistic. She also commands any and all male attention. I guess it's the entitlement. She always compared her body to mine by talking about it all the time. She was angry because we weren't built the same way, and I had, and I quote, a much better and different figure from her, and so on. So she went on into details and wouldn't stop. Let it go or shut up about it. Completely humiliating. She projected and lashed out her jealousy on me when any guy talked to me. Whether it was just basic social rhetorical greeting, someone asking for directions, innocent small talk conversation, or whether a guy was actually interested and approached me. She hated and coveted any attention I would get from the opposite sex. It was in constant competition with me. What she couldn't understand was that I didn't have the slightest interest in her, in her or competing with her. There wasn't any competition. I was her daughter. I grew up my entire life being told by my family, friends, even guys I didn't know in public that tried talking to me, that she was jealous. I couldn't see the reasoning behind it, but whatever. I just walked away and let her live in her own little sick world. In regards to her and my brother, I could never stand seeing the two of them together and the type of relationship they had. I nearly puked each time. I'm sure they've had sex. That's what it sounds like. It sounds really sick. I get triggered and physically ill every time I think about it and how wrong, sick, and inappropriate that is. I'm just thankful that myself and my children didn't end up with a personality disorder. Not sure if there is a gene that runs in my mother's family that makes them predisposed to this sort of behavior. Basically, not sure if it's the nature versus nurture when it comes to them. It's nature versus nurture. I'm just incredibly thankful that whatever it is, skip generations. Me and my children don't have that sickness. My therapist tells me from what I described to her that their brains are wired differently from that of a normal, healthy brain. I'm not exactly sure if it's psychopathy or not. Who cares? It shows vindictiveness. It shows conscious decisions and what she was doing in all this. Getting back to the original topic, I spent so much time bringing evidence to the police station it became a routine, until the day where I spotted my mother out in the parking lot with the same evil look she always had when she loved gaslighting and stalking me. By the time I ran back into the police station, she was already running down the road to a car someone was in. The cops took off after them. That was it for me. I was done. I was forced to change routine every so often to minimize the chance of being stalked. The police didn't like that much. It was a huge mess. I had to pick up some remnants of a normal life, I had before I lost my sanity. My own children have been in hiding for several months, moving from place to place just to keep them away from all that and safe. I missed my kids and couldn't handle not being with them and the damage it must have been doing to them. I had already been kicked out of school, college, and was forced to drop out for the semester until I had gotten all my personal, legal, domestic entanglements straightened, or kicked out of school if I refused. The dean of my school knew it wasn't my fault. It just posed too much of a danger to my classmates and other students. She had stalked out some of my professors, their wives, found out where they lived, left threatening and harassing messages. My last day of classes, I had to move my vehicle 3 different times. Each time I was walking to my vehicle like clockwork, a random complete stranger would come out of nowhere, charging up, screaming at me, going off like a crazy person trying to fight. The first time it happened, I thought it was an actual student. I wasn't going to fight. I hate fighting. I set my bag down and was going to try to tell her she was mistaken, that she must have me confused or mixed up with someone else. Before I had the chance to say anything, she looked shocked, like she wasn't expecting that reaction. She had a very surprised, strange, impersonal expression on her face. Then suddenly she turned and took off running, sprinting in the other direction. It was very weird. By the second time it happened, I knew what was going on. After the third time it happened, I shouted at the girl that I was leaving, just about had to back up over her before she would move from behind my vehicle. Needless to say that I skipped the last 2 classes. Later that day, while running errands, I happened to see those same 3 girls sitting at a table in a parking lot while driving down the road. I double take and turned my vehicle around to see. Once they saw who I was, they bolted. I got out of my vehicle to walk in front of the building to take a picture as instructed by the police. I then saw it was a student center building. It was a student center building of the very church that all the gangstalking had originated from in the first place. I reported it, turned in the digital evidence to the police as they told me to, and I was done with it from my end. I went into hiding with my children, and it was only quiet for a couple weeks. The last major incident was several months later. I heard after receiving a call from the detective working the case that my mother had been arrested and was locked away without bail this time, so that she gave me some breathing room. From jail, she had graciously informed all her sadistic, stalking, sexual predator cult family that I had cut off after I was 15 years old on my whereabouts. They weren't the only ones that she sent after me. Apparently someone, I have no idea, who had gotten in deep with some drug dealers, and again, from jail, my mother had kindly told them that me and my friends were the place to go to get their money. Note, although I am no angel, nor do I profess to be, I haven't ever been to jail, and I've turned out to be the complete opposite of my family and all those other people. Several sleazeball men from Houston, as they said, confronted me and several of my friends outside a store where we went to buy barbecue supplies and food for the cookout we all had planned for the day. None of us knew who they were, what they were talking about, who the person they claimed owed them money was, or what in the world was going on. We thought they were just thugs that were hopped up on something looking for trouble, until they started asking for me by my first name. There were 2 of us girls there that had that name, so I was a little more thrown off and confusing there. After a minute or so, they mentioned who gave them the name, which was my mother, and told us all after that she had told them we were the place to go to get their money. That all lasted for several minutes. Obviously, none of us knew who they were, who the original person that owed the money was, or where he was, or what they were talking about. By the time the police had gotten there, 2 of my chick friends' boyfriends had been worked over by a baseball bat, giving them a hospital job. One of my chick friends had been sexually assaulted. The rest of us girls had been jumped and drugged to the ground by our hair and beaten the crap out of. I don't remember all of it. There were several blackout periods. When it was all said and done, I'd been drugged from what I had been told by the head of the hair across the other end of the parking lot. All I remember is laying flat down on my stomach, feeling all the blood pouring sideways down my nose onto the concrete and the burning in my eyes from the blood running in them. I can remember a flash or 2 of memory of paramedics and an ambulance. I had been told later on that I had been knocked out, skull fracture, concussion, and broken nose. Both of me and my children were taken underground into hiding at separate locations at that point, which was advised by the police to the friends I was staying with. They were told that since I had gotten to this severe extreme level, that these people wouldn't stop, and it was too dangerous for my children to be around me, since known felons had near beat the death out of me, leaving me for dead. One of my other female friends was near beaten to death too. One of the guys that was with us had been beaten into a coma. Another male tried to interfere and help and had been beaten so bad in the head and face he would need plastic surgery. Although the sleazeball guys that assaulted us were all arrested, held without bail, and we were assured they would be convicted, being that they were all repeat felons with assault, drug, and other charges on their record, career criminals, that they wouldn't get out. But the police told us that those men were just the tip of the iceberg and that I was nowhere near out of danger. I have some vague memories of this. My friends that weren't there that day confirmed my patchy memories and filled me in on everything else that I had just recounted. A bunch of other stuff was going on criminally that the police discovered, and I had unknowingly exposed the cult activity of my family members my mother had sent after me. I had basically stepped into a hornet's nest and became an unbeknownst whistleblower at that point. I had no idea the extent of the illegal activity my mother's side family cult had been into. I hadn't seen or heard from any of them since I was 15 years old. All I wanted was for the guilty parties to meet justice, be convicted in a court of law for the crimes they committed. That's the only way I thought I'd be free of them. They obviously had the money and would stalk me to the ends of the earth if that's what it took. I had received death threats from them numerous times over, along with threats of kidnapping my children, and told many times that they wouldn't ever stop looking for me and they would find me anywhere and kill me and take my children. All of that had to be recorded and turned over to the police along with phone records and trace calls from the phone company. I told you, it's a real huge legal mess. That's the only thing I knew to do to stop them. I would have taken my children and moved to another country if I had the money to. Believe me, I would have. Side note, the cult members, and I quote, the family consisted of blood relatives and non-blood relatives, all indoctrinated and brainwashed by the same BS. Back to what I was saying. After that particular brutal attack, I was wheelchair bound for a while, heavily sedated from the PTSD nightmares and the heavy painkillers that were prescribed by the doctors in hospital. The friends that I was staying with were given strict orders by the police and hospital on what to do to make sure I recovered from my injuries and the procedures to take to ensure the safety of me, my children, and everyone involved, making sure I didn't injure myself further. I don't remember much. It's very foggy, sort of surreal. Most parts were like I was in a dream. It's difficult to explain. I was told and do remember, though, that despite my injuries, pain, limited physical abilities, and medication fog, that I fought everyone on what they thought was best for me. I didn't care about the attack at that point. All I cared about was my children and their safety. I couldn't handle not knowing for sure where they were at, whether or not they had been kidnapped by my grandmother's family cult, or whether the gang stalkers had gotten to them. In reality, as hard as it was, I had to accept the fact that in the condition I was, I could no longer protect my children until I had made a complete recovery from my physical injuries. I was wheelchair bound and couldn't stay conscious for more than an hour at a time. The only semi-comfort I had, after said amount of time, was that a friend of mine had taken my children in, legally, instead of them being put into foster home. This all stemmed from my having to be in hiding. All of the documented death threats and details of those threats. Once the threats were carried out, and I, along with several other people, had been beaten nearly to death, one left in an ICU in a coma, that was all the leverage they needed against me. The state almost took my children away from me. The only reason they did it is basically they concluded in their investigation that it wasn't my fault, and that I had been and was an unfortunate target of gang stalking and ritual abuse from two different cults. I remember foggy moments while sitting in the wheelchair, and the times that I insisted being left alone in the room for my own peace of mind, so I could think, fading in and out of consciousness, cascading through feelings of physical pain, to being numb, to dissonant fog, near incapacitated, trying to figure out what I was going to do. All I could think about The thought that kept haunting me, what if my children would have been with me that day instead of waiting at my friend's home, waiting for us to return with supplies for the cookout that we had been excited about and planned for so long. It was supposed to be our first real normal time since all of that had started, a celebration of sorts that we could indeed return back to a normal life. That thought, what if I had made a different decision and let my boys come to the store with us that day? They in no doubt would have been brutally beaten and killed, kidnapped, taken away, or worse. I couldn't take the risk of that potentially happening again. Those people found me once, they could easily find me again. As painful as the decision it was, I chose for my boys to stay with some people I knew that they would do everything they could to keep them safe and would return to them after I could walk again and my injuries healed enough where I was recognizable. I didn't want them to see me like that. I had been kept up. I'd been kept up on how they were doing. They were constantly asking my friends where I was and when I would be back. They didn't tell them the brutal truth of what happened. They were too young. They were told a glazed over story and reassured that I loved them and would be back for them soon. I hated lying to my kids, being raised and surrounded by pathological liars. I despised lying, and perhaps that was a major trigger for me, and tried avoiding it whenever I could. I didn't ever want to put my children through any sort of abuse that I had been put through as a kid. I worked very hard to achieve that, and up until that point had been successful. I knew the truth, and seeing their mom like that, they wouldn't understand and would be confused even more. I knew it would traumatize them even more than they already were. So I did what I had to do. Tough decisions aren't ever easy. Still, that haunting thought, what if my babies were there that day? After it was over, I ended up blocking it all out. The attack, the long time in recovery. Like that segment in my memory was just black, no matter how much I tried to remember. It was just black, with only flash images of memory. Eventually, everyone that was involved in the attack that day, that hadn't skipped the state, completely blocked out any and all memory of it as well. Not to sound selfish, I didn't feel like a freak as much for having such a lengthy gap in time and memory. The basics were explained to myself and a few others that had blocked the trauma out. That we were assaulted outside a store that we frequented and no longer went to or anywhere around. We were beaten to near death during a mugging, and we had spent some time in the hospital. The doctors and nurses told them that it would be normal with those sorts of head injuries for amnesia to occur. Short-term memories would be lost from before the attack, the day of the attack, and the long time after the recovery period has a high probability of memories being gone, and what to expect from the stress of all our reactions to this, and so on. That it would be a lengthy recovery process, especially for the coma victim. He ended up waking up, didn't ever make a full recovery, and I believe that he moved away across the country with his parents and siblings. My memory is sketchy and patchy on that, though. It was a long road for myself and my children. I could go on more in detail, but that would take too long. I need to get to the part of what kicked off and set this all off in motion. The last night I attended that church service I had written about at the beginning of this. The last night or service I attended was a several-month talked-about occasion on this certain person coming in as a guest speaker. My grandmother from a covert narc father side of the family. Not the same cult from my mother's side of the family that I had mentioned earlier in this letter. The one from my BPD mother's family that was more along the lines of a commune. This was a well-known actual church denomination religion with a very nice church building and add-ons, youth ministry like you wouldn't believe. Drawing in all kids of all ages with transportation for the kids to and from church services. This place had a well-established public persona. I had no idea that torture, sexual, and ritual abuse had been going on until that last night. When they all openly came out of the closet and opened up full-fledged, not holding back their practices or what they've been doing to the children in the children's church. It was complete, unbelievable nightmare of gaslighting, torture, physical abuse, and assault from the men and women from the MN. Women Children's Churches teaches that started with the female narc favorite word, pointing fingers at targeted female and screaming horror repeatedly. The children were brought into the adult sanctuary, gaslighted, beaten, turned on their parents. The head person's own grandchild brought up on steps in front, humiliated, made to pull his pants and boxers down while being being sexually abused. Some of the boys were made to kneel down and take beatings. Psychological torture and abuse, not sure what else they were all doing. The male deacons and ushers had locked all the exit doors to the main sanctuary. No one was allowed to escape or get out. My maternal narcissist golden child brother attended the church, along with my grandmother. He obviously smear campaigned me and my children. I have no idea what he told them. I ended up being mobbed, surrounded, gaslighted, harassed, verbally and physically and sexually threatened. I had my 3-year-old autistic toddler held close to my arms so they couldn't get to him. I went into wrestling matches, as some of them narc women included, ripping him from my arms. My oldest son was consistently hauled off and beaten. I could hear his screams. I tried my best to get to him. There was always a man a whole lot bigger than me blocking the way, surrounding me and shoving me down to the floor. As I was trying breaking through the crowd to get my 7-year-old and keep him close as I tried to figure out how to escape. My purse and keys were constantly being moved and hid from pew to pew and different areas of the main sanctuary. I couldn't have gotten myself and my kids out to safety without my car. I managed to get out with both my boys on foot. I only made it a part of the way across the rain-drenched parking lot. I was heading straight for the road to try to flag down a car for help. 4 men caught up with us. I was grabbed from behind, picked up off the ground in a reverse bear hug fashion before I noticed that my 7-year-old had been picked up, grabbed already, his mouth covered by the man that had grabbed him. He fought back relentlessly, getting out of his grip once. He was caught by the same man, drugged to the ground by another man, beaten and dragged back inside. I still had my 3-year-old held tightly in my arms with all the struggling and the grip the man had me from behind. He was afraid that my toddler had been squeezed too hard or suffocated. I managed to fight my way out of his grip, check on my toddler to make sure he was still breathing before I was jumped and attacked again. They tried ripping my 3-year-old from my arms again. One man having me by the waist, pulling me in the opposite direction. Another by the head of the hair, who let go of my hair to grab my arms that was holding on to my 3-year-old with. They were chanting on crazy, insane stuff over and over again. I tried to reason with them through the assault and the struggle, but by telling them to stop and to get them to see what they were doing. None of them would respond. They would only repeat the chanting over and over again in the same freaky tone, scaring the absolute crap out of me and my children. I have a dissociative disorder and have some blackout points in the memories of this. I was slammed to the ground in the rain-soaked, partially flooded parking lot. There were severe thunderstorms that night, and it was pouring down rain pretty bad and was extremely loud. I'm presuming that's why no one, even though it was set far enough back from the road and all the parked vehicles were blocking the view, that's why no one saw or heard the screams, what was going on, and stopped. Other women and families had attempted to run out of the church, make it to their cars and leave, but they were cut off and stopped. Their husbands were overpowered and jumped by several men, and the wives and their daughters were dragged down to the ground and their hair assaulted. I couldn't hear what was being said. From what I could see while being held and pinned down on the ground, that they were using their children against them. It looked like they were threatening sexual assault on their own young daughters and sons. From what I know of grooming now, I do believe this is what was happening the entire time. The trust of the parents and older siblings and threats of harming, going after, and even killing were made on the younger victimized children and had been the targets of sexual abuse, torture, and ritual abuse in the children's church all this time. I didn't know that until that night in the parking lot on our first escape attempt. My golden child narc brother tried drowning me in part of the parking lot. that I started to be flooded with water. I think one of the older men must have pulled him off me. I saw him going into a narcissistic rage, and several of the men turned on him trying to get him under control, which my lifelong control freak brother with his uncanny sense of entitlement wasn't having any of that, and actually declared that night that he was the voice of God, that the voice of God was speaking through him, and he was the only true prophet in the universe, in all of existence. It really, in reality, it was just his jealous, envious competing with the other top dog, longtime established NPD religious cult leaders that had been under the radar and legally getting away with for decades. That's another story. After I was yanked up for the ground, I saw my 7-year-old and his longtime children's teacher. She had stripped off his suit coat, suit vest, tie, and dress shirt. They had been ripped and cut to shreds right in front of both of us and thrown down in a dirty rainwater in the parking lot. I then saw and heard what his maternal narcissist sexual predator female children's church teacher had been doing and saying to him the entire time, grooming. She was telling and threatening him on, remember what I said I would do to your mommy and baby brother if you tell. If you don't listen or you don't do what we do. I can't even begin to describe the horror of the situation and the look and trauma and pain and suffering in that child's eyes. And he was bawling out, crying, screaming no. All that time I hadn't known. I had been fooled, fell for the hunky-dory grooming of predators. The entire time my son was being abused like that under my nose. He sacrificed himself to save me and his little brother from harm. The few minutes it took for all that happened, and that was still happening to my son in that present moment, registered. Once she started sexualizing and rubbing my son all over his body and licked him on the face. He was only a 7-year-old boy. I was being held and threatened by several men a lot bigger than me at this time. It didn't matter the second I saw that and my brain was able to process it. I completely lost it, going into Hulk Mom beast mode. I managed to and was bound and determined and hell-bent on holding onto my toddler and getting my oldest out of there, out of the arms of that woman, and get the hell out of there. The upside of being stopped by those cult member men was I probably would have been in jail from what I would have done to that woman. 40-something-year-old divorced woman that swore off adult men and targeted my 7-year-old son, grooming him into convincing him that they had some sort of sick, twisted boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. My son thought it was all his fault, that he deserved to be punished. They brainwashed him into thinking that they did this because he was a bad boy, in reality, meaning a bad, misbehaving child. The men caught me right before I got to her. Hearing everything that he was told, she picked him up and tried carrying him away to her car to have her way with him. I tried telling him that they had been lying to him. None of this was his fault, and that he was only a 7-year-old boy, that it was not an adult, that only an abusive adults were responsible for all of this. They didn't like that, I suppose. They amped up the gaslighting by laughing their butts off the entire time, denying everything that had happened, even down to denying the abuse as it was happening in real time. I managed to get out of the grips of the man restraining me, keep in mind I'm trying my best to stay focused, to hold on to my 3-year-old, make sure he isn't injured in the process. My golden child narc older brother continued with the smear campaign against me. Some of the older men ran out and joined in, trying to snatch my 3-year-old boy out of my arms, while that wench had a hold of my oldest, abusing him. The gaslighting continued. Several of the men turned to the grooming sexual predator tactics on me, one of which they were trying to talk me into making a choice between one of my children and so on. My golden child brother was even jealous of the attention I was getting from that. Yuck. He yanked one of the younger, better-looking guys by the hair that was participating in the grooming, tried jumping on him, and started making out with him. Needless to say, it caught the guy off guard and didn't sit too well. The guy tried wrestling him to the ground to overpower him and beat the crap out of him, but my sadistic brother liked it. All of this must have started hitting some buried triggers. I had to fight off puking from seeing and hearing that while I was being held restrained by some over 6-foot-something man that held me in reverse bear hug, a foot off the ground. Anyway, back to when that wench picked up my 7-year-old and tried carrying him back to the car. I managed to get out of the grip of the man that was holding me from behind. I bit his hand till I bled and let go. They caught up with me before, and I was able to fully stop the woman that had my son, but not before I was able to get a full fist of her hair and yank her to the ground as I was being pulled to the ground. She dropped my son. At this time, I was forced to accept that it was a no-win situation, but I was still going to do everything to protect my children from these monsters. She didn't put her hands back on my son again while I was grabbed, picked up again, and hauled back into the church. Remember, it was night, still pouring rain down outside. That woman, that woman that had been abusing and grooming my son had started talking trash again on how my son is her possession, her boyfriend, and her love, and she could do with him whatever she wanted. She yelled at men to stop, started to walk up to me and maliciously fill me in on the details of what she'd been planning to do to my son. Several of the men tried yelling at her, warning her to stop, but she wouldn't listen to them and kept walking towards me, giving me sick details. I was held high enough in the air, she got close enough, and I warned her to keep her hands off my son. She kept on, so I managed to drop kick her in the face, laying her out in the parking lot, and was able to yell to my 7-year-old that made it on the back end of the parking lot to run. Told to go to one of the houses and get help. Don't stop. Don't worry about me. Get inside one of those houses and don't come out until the police is there. I was yelling all this while being forcibly carried across the distance to the long parking lot. Back into the church, keep in mind, I still had my 3-year-old in my arms, trying to keep safe, so I wasn't able to put up much of a fight to get away. Being I was protecting him from every physical injury I could, I'm not a violent person by nature. After all the violence I've seen and experienced through life, I detest violence. I pretty much went into survival mode, was triggered, and tried everything I could think of to stop these people from abusing and hurting my children. It's a scene from a crazy movie, and I know, best way I can explain this is I had the reaction that most child abuse survivors would have in this intense, extreme situation. There's a lot more to it. I'll just try to wrap it up. By the time we had been carried and drugged back into the main sanctuary, I had saw that it was mass chaos. Violence, people running around with their clothes ripped off, non-compliant younger women and teenage girls were being drugged down to the ground by their hair, sexually assaulted into submission, and so on. I suppose due to my past buried traumas with disorder of abuse and dissociative disorder, I was having blackout periods through the most of it and the rest of the night. They had caught up to my older sister before and was able to get to the house. They caught up to my older son before he was able to get to the house down the road and brought him back in. Children were being sexually abused in one section of the main sanctuary also. I couldn't see that much from where I was being held, but I saw enough. The men that had my son were headed to bring him with the rest of the children. I suppose all of this tapped into some suppressed rage, adrenaline, or whatever. I managed to break free, drop kick the man that had my son in the side of the head, and he dropped him. I managed to get him up and away, trying to force the doors open again, which were locked, of course. We were forced to stay in one section of the main sanctuary. My main bellow on the knees, my below the knee skirt had already been ripped all the way up the side by my oldest son's children's church teacher when I saw her climb on top of him, straddling him while trying to restrain him by holding his arms to the ground as he was struggling, fighting her. I ran over there, screamed at her to stop and get off him. She went into a rage, turned on me, latched onto my skirt, and I jumped and ripped it completely up the side, trying to mosh pit style mob me. At this point, my shirt was ripped on the side of the collar, and the entire left side of my shirt had been ripped up to the armpit. A good portion of the back of my shirt was also completely missing. Also, my shoes were gone. So much had happened, I had no idea where I had lost them at. Anyway, this proceeded with everyone until way past sunrise, and I wasn't the only one. There aren't words to do any of this justice on the abuse, gaslighting, scare tactics, adult and family members being used against children, children being used against their parents and siblings. They tried forcing me into joining and submitting their cult and the ways of their cult by submission, and proving my submission by willing declaring and participating in the abuse of others in there. I tried lying and agreeing just to get them to stop, but that didn't work. They wanted proof. It was brutal, but I refused to do so and held out. It was a living nightmare. We were all experiencing the worst types of abuse imaginable while locked in that building. We had entered around 5 p.m. that evening and weren't let out until around 10:30 a.m. the next morning. We were held down and forced to drink the quote-unquote communion wine. I was terrified with all the crazy stuff that was happening and the crazy things that were being preached at us. It was poison. It was a poison Kool-Aid thing, but it wasn't. I was drugged. It was a drugged wine thing. It took 4 men to hold me down to drink that. One holding my legs, one holding my shoulders, one holding my head by the head, one holding my head back by the head of my hair, and one holding my face, forcing my mouth open while the other was pouring wine down my throat. It's a foggy memory. The only memory I have of it is like I'm watching everything happen to me from outside my body. That's all I'm going to say about that. My sons and I, along with a few other women in a drug-induced fog state, made another failed attempt to escape. The sun was just coming up at that time, and we made it outside. Fast forwarding to the end, I only remember patches of walking to the car with my kids and my narc older brother. He was drugged and loopy out of his mind. He insisted on driving. We're terrified into submission, and we're told and threatened whatever would happen to us if we dared telling anybody. I remembered seeing the woman being carried out and beaten unconscious, but to the side of the church, under the drive-through awning where no one around could see. They were thrown in the back seats. One lady, I don't know who that couple was thrown into the trunk. My narc brother was then yanked me by my arm into the car, saying that I wasn't supposed to see that. He carried out the threats to both me and my children. He was going to kill us if we tried to leave or tell anybody what happened. He took complete control over the house. I tried phoning the police about it. Some cop showed up at my door, angry, telling me that they don't appreciate false stories and calls. They said it was a crime and that they could arrest me for it, but they would let me off with a warning as long as I didn't do it again. My brother was there and heard, and that was it. No more boundaries. He snooped in my journals. I couldn't even write about it to get it out. The gaslighting was horrendous, and still that situation. The gangstalking started. My brother's primary goal was to drive me to the point of suicide and take over all my possessions, including my home. He wanted my children and to move my mother in. But my mother was so up on her high horse and was so beneath her that she wouldn't move in until I was dead and gone. She told my brother to take out the trash and then she would think about moving in with them. Obviously, keeping her grandchildren alive around her was for narcissistic supply. That's the part of the story I waited so long to get out. My apologies for the length. I'll try to condense it down as much as I can without cutting out too much detail. Oh, I wanted to state that my motives for sending this in primary in hopes for a catharsis on my end. Majority of people wouldn't believe this type of thing anyway. Just need to put it out there that I am not seeking attention or trying to one-up or outdo anyone. I suppose somewhere in my mind I hope that this will provide some sort of closure. Things that have been taken such a extreme length to keep quiet, which that is typical narc abuse tactic to silence their victims. I don't think I'm special or extraordinary, or I'm not looking for a pity party of attention. It's just a plain old regular person who's experienced some bad stuff in life. Just like all of the narc victims on this channel, I'm sure all of our personal account experiences are difficult to write about and send in. I wish all of the abuse survivors the best wishes on their journey for recovery and healing. Thank you, Anonymous. I really wish you'd name the cult. Were they arrested? How did they do this out in public in a parking lot so close to houses without being heard? I'm not saying I don't believe it. I mean, I just don't understand how it. Nobody said anything. They never got caught. Who's the cult? And all this happened before your mother got arrested and went to jail, I think. Well, I'm sure the same shit happened to you as a kid. You just don't remember it. It's a bad story nonetheless. But, I mean, it would be it's the ultimate form of gang stalking. It's cultism. And it's dangerous, and I'm glad you got out of it. So, thank you for your story. Thank you for your contribution. I appreciate it very much. I hope you're doing much better, and you've cut all these people out of your life, and you never see them again. That's the only thing you can do at this point. Thank you to everybody who's watching. Please leave any comments or opinions in the comment section below. And if you have a story, if you want your story on the channel, or have an audio, or want to expose your narcissist, or you'd just like to contribute to the channel, you know what to do with the PayPal link in the description box. I'll have the video right back to you. Sally Matthews, thanks for watching. I'll see you all again soon.